the shadow of the great battles of the First World War lies a multitude of forgotten skirmishes, whose significance is no less crucial for understanding the overall picture of the conflict. One such battle unfolded near Vitebsk, an ancient city on the banks of the Western Dvina, which became the arena for a fierce confrontation between Russian, Polish, and German troops. Located at the intersection of vital transport arteries, Vitebsk represented a key logistical hub, control over which opened access to the supply of entire armies. The railway lines connecting Petrograd with the western provinces of the empire and the water routes along the Western Dvina made this city a strategic objective for the warring parties. Here, amidst the hilly landscapes and dense forests of Belarus, thousands of soldiers of different nationalities converged in a deadly struggle, united only by their duty to their countries and the desire to survive in the meat grinder of war. Vitebsk, at the beginning of the 20th century, was not just a dot on the map of the Russian Empire, but one of the key transport hubs of the entire western region. The city, spread out on the banks of the Western Dvina, occupied an exceptional position in the system of military communications. 5 railway lines converging here connected Petrograd with Riga, Warsaw, Kiev, and other strategic centers. This transportation web transformed Vitebsk into an artery through which flowed the lifeblood of the Russian army: ammunition, provisions, reinforcements, and medical supplies. No less significant was the Western Dvina, an ancient waterway that allowed goods to be delivered even when railway lines were overloaded. In wartime conditions, when every wagon and every barge was of critical importance, control over such a hub became a matter of survival for entire armies. For the Russian command, Vitebsk served as one of the strongholds for the defense of the northwestern direction. The loss of the city would mean not only the disruption of vital communications, but also the opening of a path to Smolensk and further to Moscow. General Alexeyev, who held the post of Chief of Staff of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, repeatedly emphasized, "Holding the Vitebsk hub is equivalent to maintaining control over the entire northern sector of the front." The German and Austro-Hungarian commands perfectly understood the strategic value of this point. In the analytical notes of the German General Staff, Vitebsk appeared as the key to Russia's northern gates. The capture of the city would not only disrupt the supply of Russian armies, but also create a bridgehead for further advance deep into the empire. The surrounding hills and uplands gave Vitebsk special significance. The commanding heights allowed control over vast territories and the main approaches to the city. Whoever controlled these heights gained an undeniable tactical advantage. German military engineers studying the topography of the region noted, "Nature has created an ideal defensive line here." By the spring of 1915, after heavy winter battles, the front line approached Vitebsk. The city, never planned as a fortress, suddenly found itself at the epicenter of a military storm. Residents and military command hastily erected fortifications, turning every height and every ravine into part of the defensive system. The situation was complicated by the fact that Vitebsk was on the main route for the evacuation of industrial enterprises from the western provinces. Railway stations were jammed with trains carrying factory equipment, institutional archives, and refugees. Any disruption in the operation of the transport hub threatened catastrophic consequences not only for the front, but also for the civilian population. The Battle of Vitebsk pitted significant forces of 3 armies against each other, each with its own characteristics in training, armament, and tactics. The Russian Imperial Army was represented by units of the 5th Army under the command of Lieutenant General Pavel Plev, an experienced military leader, a participant in the Russo-Japanese campaign. The group included 2 army corps totaling about 60,000 bayonets and sabers, supported by 400 guns of various calibers. Cossack units played a special role, used for reconnaissance and raids behind German lines. Russian infantry, despite the shortage of modern rifles and machine guns, was distinguished by high morale and steadfastness in defense. Plehve adhered to conservative tactics, relying on the power of artillery and deeply echeloned defense. Polish volunteer formations numbering up to 5,000 men under the command of Colonel Józef Dobor-Musnicki cooperated with the Russian troops. These units, although inferior in armament to regular troops, compensated for this with high motivation and knowledge of the terrain. The German group was a striking fist of elite units of Field Marshal August von Mackensen's 10th Army, a recognized master of breaking through fortified positions. The Germans had an advantage in heavy artillery and machine guns, and also had several airplanes for aerial reconnaissance. The total number of German troops reached 45,000 men, with 350 guns and 60 mortars. Mackensen was a proponent of concentrated strike tactics on a narrow sector, followed by the development of success with mobile reserves. His right hand was General Richard von Kravel, who commanded the elite 12th Infantry Division. A feature of the German troops was high discipline and excellent training of junior command personnel, capable of acting proactively in difficult conditions. At first glance, the balance of forces was in favor of the Russian side, but the Germans compensated for the numerical minority with superiority in technology and tactical flexibility. The fate of the battle largely depended on whose strategy would prove more effective: the methodical pressure of the Russians or the swift breakthrough of the Germans. The spring of 1915 became a turning point in the history of the Eastern Front. After a relative lull in the winter months, the German command developed a plan for a massive offensive designed to reverse the situation in the east. The main blow was decided to be struck in the Gorlice-Tarnów area, where the Russian defenses seemed most vulnerable. On May 2nd, an artillery bombardment of unprecedented power began. Over 1,000 guns unleashed a storm of fire on Russian positions. In 4 hours, over 700,000 shells were fired, literally plowing up the line of defense. When the German infantry attacked, they met only scattered resistance from demoralized and stunned Russian soldiers. The front was breached on a 35-kilometer-wide sector. By the evening of May 3rd, the Germans had advanced up to 20 kilometers deep, capturing thousands of prisoners and hundreds of guns. The Gorlice breakthrough marked the beginning of a disaster for the Russian army. Lacking sufficient reserves and experiencing a severe shortage of shells, the Russian command was forced to begin a general retreat. By mid-May, German-Austrian troops had forced the San River. By early June, Przemyśl and Lviv fell. Russian armies retreated along the entire front, leaving Galicia, Poland, and part of the Baltic states. This retreat went down in history as the Great Retreat. In 3 summer months, Russian troops abandoned an area of about 300,000 square kilometers. Crucial industrial areas were lost. Millions of refugees poured into the depths of Russia, exacerbating social problems. It was in this context that the drama near Vitebsk unfolded. After the fall of Warsaw on August 5th, the German command sought to develop its success by striking in the northeast direction. Seizing Vitebsk opened the prospect of further advance to Smolensk and created a threat to the entire northern sector of the Russian front. Field Marshal Hindenburg, who commanded the entire Eastern Front, allocated a shock group for this operation under the command of Mackensen, reinforced with heavy artillery and special assault units. The Russian command, foreseeing the threat, hastily transferred reinforcements to Vitebsk. General Plehve received a categorical order from Stavka: hold the Vitebsk node at all costs. The situation was complicated by the fact that the main routes for the evacuation of industrial equipment and refugees from the western provinces passed through the city. The loss of this transport hub threatened catastrophic consequences. By mid-August, both sides had completed the concentration of forces. An ominous silence hung over the hills of Vitebsk, a harbinger of the coming storm. At dawn on August 21, 1915, the silence of the Vitebsk suburbs was shattered by a deafening roar. Hundreds of German guns simultaneously opened fire on Russian positions. The sky darkened with smoke. The earth trembled under the impact of heavy shells. Thus began one of the most dramatic pages in the history of the Eastern Front. The German artillery preparation lasted 4 hours without interruption. Methodically, square by square, German artillerymen plowed through Russian trenches, dugouts, and command posts. The fire of the newest mortars, Minenwerfers, whose shells weighing up to 100 kilograms literally leveled any fortifications, proved particularly destructive. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the artillery fire was suddenly shifted deep into the Russian defense, and clouds of poisonous gas descended upon the front line. This was the second use of chemical weapons on the Eastern Front. Yellow-green clouds of chlorine slowly crept along the lowlands, filling trenches and ravines. Russian soldiers, lacking gas masks, tried to save themselves by covering their faces with wet rags. People choked, coughed up blood, went blind, but did not abandon their positions, recalled later Lieutenant Nikolai Bressler of the Semyonovsky Regiment. In some places, entire platoons died without moving from their spots. Following the gas attack, special assault groups, Stoßtruppen, advanced. These were elite soldiers armed with grenades, flamethrowers, and automatic pistols. They operated in small detachments of 8 to 10 men, infiltrating through gaps in the defense and attacking from the flanks and rear. The Germans delivered their main blow along the Dvinsky Highway, aiming to cut the Russian defense in two. Here, the elite 12th Infantry Division under the command of General von Krivel advanced. In the first 2 hours of the battle, German troops managed to advance 3 kilometers, capturing the first and second lines of Russian trenches. However, on the third line, they were met with a hail of fire. Russian artillerymen, who had preserved most of their batteries thanks to their placement on the reverse slopes of the hills, opened rapid fire with canister shot. The offensive faltered. The Germans lay down and began to dig in. By noon, the situation became critical for the defenders. The left flank of the Russian position was outflanked, and German infantry reached the important height 217, which dominated the area. General Pleve made a risky decision to throw his last reserve, 2 regiments of Siberian rifles, into a counterattack. The Siberians attacked without artillery preparation, relying on the element of surprise. Singing "God Save the Tsar," they launched a bayonet charge. The Germans wavered and began to retreat. By evening, Height 217 was recaptured, but the cost was terrible. More than 1,000 Russian soldiers lay on its slopes. The defense of Vitebsk became a model of cooperation between Russian and Polish units, despite the complex history of relations between the two peoples. The core of the defensive system consisted of 3 lines of trenches, located on the dominant heights around the city. Particular attention was paid to artillery positions, carefully camouflaged on the reverse slopes of the hills. This decision, made by Colonel Oznobishin, commander of the artillery brigade, saved most of the Russian guns during the first German strike. Polish volunteer formations under the command of Daubor Musnicki occupied the left flank of the defense, covering the approaches from the Polotsk highway. Their positions were reinforced by a system of wolf pits and triple-row wire obstacles. The Poles brought their partisan warfare experience to the defense, creating numerous false positions and hidden strongholds in the woodlands. Polish riflemen are fighting not only for their lives, but also for a future free Poland, General Plev noted in his report, highly praising the Allies' morale. Coordination between Russian and Polish units was carried out through special liaison officers. Each Polish battalion had an attached Russian officer, and representatives of the Polish command were constantly present at Plev's headquarters. To overcome the language barrier, simple rocket signals were used. Red, request for artillery support. Green, successful repelling of an attack. White, critical situation requiring reserves. However, serious problems also emerged during the defense. Polish units experienced an acute shortage of ammunition, especially artillery shells. The Russian command, itself suffering from a shell hunger, could not fully satisfy their needs. This forced the Poles to conserve every shot, which reduced the effectiveness of fire support. Another problem was the differences in tactical doctrines. Russian officers preferred a rigid defense of specific lines, while Poles gravitated towards mobile defense with active use of small-scale counterattacks. These contradictions sometimes led to a lack of coordination at the junctures of units. This was particularly evident on the second day of the battle, when Captain Rydz Śmigły's Polish battalion arbitrarily abandoned its positions on Hill 189, deeming them inconvenient for defense, and withdrew to a more advantageous line. The resulting gap almost led to disaster. The Germans immediately exploited it to outflank the neighboring Russian regiment. Height 217 became the epicenter of a bloody drama that unfolded near Vitebsk. This inconspicuous elevation, covered with a sparse pine forest, acquired strategic importance due to its location. From it, all approaches to the city and the railway station were visible. After the first 2 days of fighting, both sides realized whoever controls the height controls the entire battle area. On August 23rd, the Germans launched a decisive assault. At 4 o'clock in the morning, when the pre-dawn fog still lay low in the hollows, more than 50 heavy guns opened hurricane fire on the summit and slopes of the height. In 2 hours, about 6,000 shells fell on the Russian positions. When the artillery shifted its fire deeper into the defense, 3 regiments of German infantry rose to attack. The Russians met the advancing forces with a hail of machine gun fire. The machine gun crew of 2nd Lieutenant Savelyev particularly distinguished themselves, who, having lost all their crew members, continued to fire alone until fatally wounded. Nevertheless, the numerical superiority of the Germans told. By 7 in the morning, they had captured the southern slope of the height and began to advance towards the summit. At this critical moment, the commander of the Russian regiment, Colonel Nestorov, threw his last reserve into a counterattack. A company of St. George's Cavaliers under the command of Staff Captain Bronsky. These seasoned soldiers, each of whom had a St. George's Cross for previous exploits, attacked the advancing Germans on the flank. A brutal hand-to-hand combat ensued. The Germans wavered and began to retreat, but at that moment they were supported by a second wave of attackers. By noon, the defenders' situation became critical. Ammunition was running out, and communication with headquarters was cut off. Captain Likachev took command when Colonel Nestorov was severely wounded. He organized an all-around defense at the very top of the height, gathering around him about 100 surviving soldiers. At 2 in the afternoon, the Germans launched a new attack, this time using flamethrowers. Streams of flame burned out trenches and dugouts. It seemed impossible to hold the height. At this moment, the Polish volunteer battalion of Major Kosciuszko came to the aid of the defenders. The Poles attacked the Germans from an unexpected direction, through a swamp on the western slope, which was considered impassable. The blow of the Polish riflemen was so sudden that the Germans began to retreat in a panic. By evening, the height was completely cleared of the enemy. But the price of this victory turned out to be terrible. Out of 800 defenders of the height, less than 200 remained alive. This episode became a turning point in the entire battle. Having lost about 7,000 soldiers in 3 days of assaults, the German command realized that a quick breakthrough would not be possible. Field Marshal Mackensen was forced to switch to positional warfare, bringing up reserves and regrouping forces. In war, victory is determined not only by the bravery of soldiers and the skill of generals, but also by a smoothly functioning supply system. The Battle of Vitebsk vividly demonstrated this truth, transforming into a battle not only of armies, but also of the logistical systems of the opposing sides. By the start of the operation, both armies faced serious challenges in providing their troops with everything necessary. The Russian armies suffered from a chronic shortage of artillery shells, the infamous shell famine, which became the scourge of the entire 1915 campaign. Each battery received no more than 20 shells per gun per day, catastrophically low for active combat operations. Commanders were forced to impose strict limits on fire, which significantly reduced the effectiveness of artillery support. The situation was complicated by the condition of the roads in the Vitebsk area. August rains turned dirt tracks into an impassable quagmire. Horse-drawn transport, the main means of delivering goods from railway stations to the front line, struggled to overcome the washed-out roads. Carts got stuck in the mud, and horses were exhausted. To deliver 1 box of cartridges to the front line, it takes 4 horses and a whole day's journey, noted Captain Vorontsov, quartermaster of the Semenovsky Regiment, in his diary. The German army had a more advanced supply system, actively using narrow-gauge field railways, which were laid directly to the front line. Special engineering units could build a kilometer of such a road in a day. This allowed heavy loads, artillery shells, barbed wire, construction materials for fortifications, to be delivered in close proximity to the front. However, even German logistics were not flawless. Stretched communications and the need to supply troops on a huge front from the Baltic to the Carpathians created tension even for the well-oiled German system. Providing food became an especially acute problem. Local resources were quickly exhausted, and delivering provisions from Germany required significant transport capacity. Weather conditions made their dramatic contribution to the outcome of the battle. The unusually rainy August of 1915 turned the battlefields into swamps. Artillery positions were washed away, and guns got stuck in the mud. Russian soldiers, more accustomed to such conditions, used this as a tactical advantage. "The Germans fear mud more than our bayonets," they joked in the trenches. Medical support became another critical factor. Russian field hospitals experienced a severe shortage of medicines, especially painkillers and antiseptics. The wounded had to be evacuated to rear hospitals in Smolensk and Moscow, which, due to bad roads, took up to 3 days. Many did not survive to receive qualified care. The German military medical service worked more efficiently, having at its disposal special ambulance trains equipped for surgical assistance. This made it possible to save the severely wounded and quickly return the lightly wounded to duty. Behind every great battle stand thousands of personal stories, of ordinary people caught in the center of a historical storm. The Battle of Vitebsk is no exception. Surviving diaries, letters, and memoirs reveal the human dimension of this tragedy. Second Lieutenant Alexei Savinov from the Tver Regiment wrote in his diary, August 24th, 5th day of fighting. Only 17 men left from our company. Yesterday we buried Lieutenant Krasnov, a direct hit into the dugout. My hands are shaking from fatigue, but we are holding our positions. The Germans attack 3 to 4 times a day. Ammunition is running out. We've been eating dry biscuits for 3 days. These simple lines convey the atmosphere of desperate resistance better than any official reports. From the German side, letters from Lieutenant Otto Weinrich to his fiancée in Munich have survived. The Russians fight like madmen. Today we captured 7. All are wounded, but they carry themselves with dignity. One, just a boy, showed a picture of his mother. I gave him a cigarette and chocolate. In war, we are all just people. The fate of the civilian population of Vitebsk and the surrounding villages turned out to be particularly tragic. The city, which had a population of about 75,000 before the war, was half empty by the time of the battle. The remaining residents, mostly elderly, women, and children, found themselves caught between 2 fires. Maria Kovalchuk, then a 12-year-old girl, recalled, "We lived in the basement for 3 weeks. Mother hung wet sheets over the windows to protect us from gas. At night, we would go out to gather vegetables from the gardens. One day, a shell hit the neighboring house, and we were buried under the earth. Soldiers dug us out, Russians or Germans, I don't remember. It didn't matter then." City hospitals were overflowing with wounded from both sides. Dr. Semyon Goldstein wrote in his diary, "We have been operating non-stop for 2 days. There are no bandages, ether is running out. We lay the wounded directly on the floor. Russians and Germans lie side by side, moaning in different languages, but the pain is the same for everyone." The villagers of the surrounding areas suffered perhaps even more severely. Many villages were in the zone of artillery shelling or were burned during the retreat. Peasants went into the forests, dug dugouts, and tried to survive away from their homes. Stepan Voronich, an old resident of the village of Malya-Lushki, recounted after the war, "We dug a dugout in the swamp where they couldn't find us. We ate mushrooms and berries. One day we stumbled upon a wounded German pilot. My wife bandaged him, even though our son had died a month before. Then he left to rejoin his own. War is a terrible thing, but one must not lose one's humanity." The Battle of Vitebsk, lasting 7 bloody days, concluded at the end of August 1915, fundamentally altering the strategic situation on the northern sector of the Eastern Front. The front line stabilized 20 kilometers west of the city, forming a characteristic salient that military cartographers dubbed the Vitebsk Balcony. This salient deeply wedged into German positions, creating a constant threat to the flanks of German forces. The Russian command succeeded not only in holding a crucial transport hub, but also in creating a bridgehead for a possible future counteroffensive. The German plan for a lightning breakthrough to Smolensk was thwarted. Field Marshal Mackensen, whose troops suffered heavy losses, over 11,000 killed, wounded, and missing, was forced to redeploy significant forces from other sectors of the front to stabilize the situation. This eased German pressure in the Daugavpils and Riga areas, giving Russian troops there a much-needed respite. For the Russian army, the victory at Vitebsk held immense moral significance after months of continuous retreat. General Alexeyev, in his report to the Tsar, noted, "The Battle of Vitebsk proved that our army, despite all trials, has retained its combat capability and can not only defend but also inflict sensitive blows on the enemy." The preservation of control over the Vitebsk railway junction was particularly important. This allowed for the completion of the evacuation of industrial enterprises from the western provinces and the establishment of uninterrupted supplies to the northern sector of the front. Dozens of echelons with reinforcements, ammunition, and provisions passed through Vitebsk daily. For the Polish formations, participation in the defense of Vitebsk became an important milestone in the formation of national self-awareness. The joint victory with Russian troops strengthened combat brotherhood and laid the foundation for future cooperation. Polish General Dobor Musnicki was awarded the Order of St. George, 4th class, the highest military award of the Russian Empire. Strategically, the Battle of Vitebsk marked the transition from maneuver warfare to positional warfare on the Eastern Front. Both sides began to create deeply echeloned defensive systems with numerous trench lines, concrete fortifications, and extensive minefields. The front stabilized for many months, turning into a semblance of the Western Front with its positional stalemate. The German command drew important lessons from the failure at Vitebsk. The approach to breaking through fortified positions was re-evaluated. Instead of frontal attacks on a wide front, the Germans began to practice concentrated strikes on narrow sectors, using assault groups supported by flamethrowers and mortars. This tactic was subsequently successfully applied in the Battle of Riga in 1917. The Battle of Vitebsk instantly caused a powerful political resonance in all the belligerent countries. In Russia, news of the heroic defense of the city was met with immense enthusiasm after months of heavy retreats. Petrograd newspapers came out with triumphant headlines. "The enemy is stopped. The Russian spirit is invincible." The official communiqué from the headquarters of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief emphasized the exceptional steadfastness of the troops and the mastery of the command. Emperor Nicholas II personally sent a telegram to General Plehve. "Convey my imperial gratitude to the valiant defenders of Vitebsk. Their feat will never be forgotten by Russia." In the State Duma, where sharp criticism of the military leadership had previously been voiced, a truce between factions was temporarily established. Even opposition deputies recognized the significance of the victory. Cadet leader Pavel Milyukov stated, "In an hour of trials, we must be united, regardless of political differences." The German reaction was diametrically opposite. Official reports attempted to downplay the scale of the defeat, presenting the events as a tactical retreat to straighten the front line. However, in the secret correspondence of Kaiser Wilhelm with the General Staff, disappointment shone through. "Our plans in the eastern direction will require serious adjustment." The German press, which was under strict military control, only briefly mentioned the battles near Vitebsk, focusing readers' attention on successes in other regions. Polish society received the news of the battle with mixed feelings. On the one hand, the heroism of Polish volunteers evoked national pride. On the other hand, many saw this as just another episode of the war, where Poles shed blood for foreign interests. The Warsaw Underground newspaper Polish Courier wrote, "Our sons are fighting with unprecedented bravery. But when will they fight for their own freedom?" The reaction of the Entente countries was enthusiastic. The French Le Figaro dedicated a spread to the Vitebsk victory, with a map of the battle and portraits of distinguished commanders. The British Times noted, "The Russian allies have proven that their fighting spirit is not broken, despite all difficulties." This inspires hope for a turning point in the war. Military analysts of the Western powers followed the events with particular attention. French General Joffre sent a special mission to Russia to study the experience of the Vitebsk battle, especially the tactics of repelling massive gas attacks. The American press, representing a then neutral country, gave the most objective picture of events. New York Times correspondent Walter Duranty, who was in Russia, sent detailed reports, noting both the heroism of the defenders and the enormous casualties on both sides. His articles shaped American public opinion, gradually swaying it in favor of the Entente. The Battle of Vitebsk became a turning point in the coverage of the war by the Russian press. For the first time after a long break, detailed reports from the front appeared, along with interviews with commanders and photographs of distinguished soldiers. Censorship restrictions were temporarily eased, allowing journalists to create a more realistic picture of events. This had a dual effect. On the one hand, it strengthened patriotic sentiments, and on the other, it showed society the true cost of the war. The memory of the Battle of Vitebsk is preserved differently in Russia and Poland, reflecting the complex historical relations between the two nations. In Russia, for a long time, this battle remained in the shadow of larger World War I engagements. It was only in the 1990s, when military archives were opened, that historians were able to fully appreciate the significance of this episode. A permanent exhibition dedicated to the battle has been created in the Vitebsk City Museum of Local Lore. It features authentic photographs, documents, weapon samples, and personal belongings of those who participated in the fighting. A central place is occupied by the diorama Height 217 by local artist Mikhail Savitsky, which meticulously recreates the moment of the decisive counterattack by Russian and Polish troops. Annually, on August 25th, the day the battle ended, a memorial ceremony for the fallen takes place at the mass grave on the outskirts of the city. It is attended by representatives of veteran organizations, clergy, school children, and students. A military salute is fired, wreaths are laid, and Orthodox priests serve a requiem. In Polish historical memory, the Battle of Vitebsk holds a special place as an example of the heroism of Polish volunteers who fought shoulder to shoulder with Russian soldiers. In Warsaw, in the Museum of the Polish Army, an entire hall is dedicated to the actions of Polish formations on the Eastern Front, including the Vitebsk operation. In the city of Lodz, where most of the soldiers of the Polish Volunteer Battalion originated, a monument to the heroes of Vitebsk has been erected. The bronze composition depicts Polish and Russian soldiers standing back to back in defense. The inscription on the pedestal reads, "Divided by history, united by courage." The Polish tradition of commemorating the fallen differs from the Russian in its greater family orientation. Descendants of the battle participants preserve photographs, letters, and awards as family heirlooms, passing down oral histories of their ancestors' exploits from generation to generation. Historical research in both countries has followed a complex path. During the Soviet period, ideological restrictions prevented an objective assessment of the role of Polish formations. In Cold War Poland, too, moments of successful cooperation with the Russians were avoided. Only in recent decades have historians from both countries begun collaborative work to reconstruct the full picture of events. An important step was the international conference Forgotten Battles of the Eastern Front, held in 2000 jointly by Russian and Polish scholars. Following it, a bilingual collection of documents and memoirs of participants in the Vitebsk battle was published. In the literature of both countries, the Battle of Vitebsk has been reflected in works of fiction. The novel Brothers in Arms by Polish writer Andrzej Sapkowski and the novella The Height by Russian author Boris Vasilyev are based on the real events of those days. The German command gained invaluable experience from the battle near Vitebsk, which subsequently transformed their approach to warfare on the Eastern Front. A special commission led by Colonel Max Hoffmann, one of the architects of German strategy, conducted a meticulous analysis of all aspects of the battle. The results of this study were compiled into a secret report titled the Vitebsk Memorandum. The document, recently discovered in the military archives of Freiburg, reveals the depth of German analysis and the conclusions that influenced subsequent operations. The first and most important lesson was the recognition of the ineffectiveness of massive frontal attacks against prepared defenses. General von Kravel, who commanded the strike group, wrote in his memoirs, "The Russians learned to create multi-layered defenses with superbly camouflaged firing points. Every meter of advance cost us dozens of lives. We literally bought the land with the blood of our soldiers." Instead of frontal attacks, German strategists developed a new tactic of infiltration, the penetration of small assault groups through weak points in the defense, followed by a flank and rear attack on the enemy's main forces. This tactic was first tested precisely after the Battle of Vitebsk and was subsequently successfully applied in breaking through Russian positions near Riga. The second important conclusion concerned the use of chemical weapons. Although the gas attack near Vitebsk brought tactical success, its effectiveness proved to be lower than expected. Russian soldiers, even without gas masks, managed to organize resistance. As a result, German chemists developed new, more deadly gases, phosgene and diphosgene, and their application tactics were significantly revised. Special attention in Quote 3 was paid to the issues of artillery and infantry interaction. Lieutenant General Erich Ludendorff, who later became the de facto head of the German armed forces, noted, "The result was the creation of the concept of the successively shifting artillery fire directly preceding the infantry's advance." This tactic was first applied in the Battle of Riga in September 1917 and proved to be extremely effective. The Battle of Vitebsk also forced the Germans to reconsider their views on the role of aviation. The limited use of airplanes for reconnaissance showed the inadequacy of such an approach. Captain Hermann Göring, then a young fighter pilot and later the creator of the Luftwaffe, wrote in his report, "Air superiority provides a decisive advantage. Russian artillery positions remained undetected precisely due to the lack of aerial reconnaissance. After Vitebsk, the German command began to form specialized squadrons for direct support of ground troops, the predecessors of future close air support aviation. German military educational institutions included the study of the Battle of Vitebsk in their programs. At the Military Academy in Berlin, cadets meticulously analyzed each stage of the operation, analyzing errors and successful solutions. Professor of Tactics, Colonel Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb, future Field Marshal of the Third Reich, developed a special course based on the experience of the Eastern Front, where the Battle of Vitebsk occupied a central place. While dramatic events unfolded on the battlefields of Eastern Europe, headquarters and military academies in London and Paris closely monitored every step of the warring parties. Russia's Western allies, embroiled in a bloody positional war on the Western Front, sought any information that could help overcome the stalemate of trench warfare. The Battle of Vitebsk, despite its relatively localized nature, attracted close attention from French and British military analysts. The French General Staff dispatched a special mission to Russia, led by Colonel Henri Pierrot, an experienced artilleryman and military theoretician. His task was not only to observe the actions of the Russian army, but also to gather information about German tactics on the Eastern Front. In his detailed report to General Joffre, Pierrot noted, "The Russians demonstrated exceptional resilience in defense, despite the overwhelming technical superiority of the enemy. Their ability to improvise with a shortage of equipment deserves the closest study. The French paid particular attention to the experience of countering gas attacks. After the first use of chemical weapons at Ypres in April 1915, the Allies feverishly sought effective protective measures. Russian soldiers near Vitebsk, using primitive means, wet rags soaked in urine or soda solution, managed to minimize losses from chlorine. These observations led to the improvement of the first French gas masks. The British military mission, led by Brigadier General Alfred Knox, focused on studying the logistical aspects of the battle. In his dispatch to London, Knox wrote, "The Germans created an exemplary supply system, using field railways and motorized transport. However, the Russians demonstrated that even with limited technical capabilities, one can effectively resist a modern army if the terrain and human factor are skillfully utilized." Western observers were struck by the effectiveness of Russian artillery, despite a severe shortage of shells. The placement of batteries on reverse slopes of hills, careful camouflage of positions, and economical expenditure of ammunition, all of this was subsequently incorporated into the tactical manuals of the French and British armies. Major Charles de Gaulle, the future President of France, then a young officer of the French General Staff, compiled an analytical note on the Battle of Vitebsk, where he particularly noted, "The Eastern Front demonstrates to us that the war of the future is not only a clash of technology, but also a confrontation of will, endurance, and the ability to improvise." The Russian soldier, with his natural steadfastness and patience, represents a factor underestimated by the German command. British military theorists drew important lessons from the Battle of Vitebsk regarding the interaction of different branches of service. Colonel Fuller, one of the founders of the theory of mechanized warfare, carefully studied the experience of German stormtroops used near Vitebsk. These small, well-armed detachments, operating autonomously in the direction of the main attack, became the prototype of the tactics that the British later applied in the Battle of Cambrai. The Battle of Vitebsk, like many other local battles of the First World War, remained in the shadow of the grandiose operations that defined the course of the 20th century for a long time. However, it is precisely such forgotten battles that form the complete picture of the conflict, revealing its true complexity and multifaceted nature. The Battle of Vitebsk, in August 1915, occupies a special place in military history, combining elements of both the fading era of classical battles and the nascent era of total mechanized warfare. If one compares the Battle of Vitebsk with other little-known battles of the First World War, a surprising parallel emerges with the battles for Suwalki in October 1914 or the Battle of Krasny Star in the summer of 1915. All these clashes were characterized by ferocity, high casualties, and strategic significance disproportionate to their fame in historical memory. Military historians today recognize that the outcome of the Battle of Vitebsk largely determined the character of the entire 1915 campaign on the Eastern Front. The retention of this key transportation hub allowed the Russian army to stabilize the front and avoid even more catastrophic consequences of the Great Retreat. It is noteworthy that in the memoirs of Marshal Foch, the supreme commander of the Allied forces at the end of the war, the Battle of Vitebsk is mentioned as an example of steadfastness that altered the calculations of the German command. For modern military science, this battle is valuable as an example of successful defense in conditions of the enemy's technical superiority. The tactical decisions of General Plehve, deeply echeloned defense, active maneuvering of reserves, skillful use of terrain, are studied in military academies even today. In the collective memory of the participating nations, the Battle of Vitebsk occupies a different place. For Russia, it became a symbol of resilience during a period of severe trials. For Poland, an example of the heroism of its sons fighting for the future independence of their homeland. For Germany, a lesson that forced a re-evaluation of strategy in the East. Of particular interest is how the perception of this battle changed over time. In the interwar period, when Poland gained independence and Russia experienced a revolution, the memory of the joint struggle was obscured by political contradictions. In the Soviet period, ideological restrictions did not allow for an objective assessment of the role of the "two" in general and its individual episodes in particular. Only in recent decades, with the opening of archives and a departure from ideological dogmas, have historians been able to reconstruct the true picture of events. Today, the Battle of Vitebsk is returning from oblivion, thanks to the efforts of researchers, local historians, and descendants of the battle's participants. Museum exhibitions are being created, scientific conferences are being held, and documents and memoirs are being published. This revival of historical memory is of great importance not only for understanding the past, but also for comprehending the present. For many geopolitical problems of today are rooted precisely in the era of the First World War.